First of all, good morning, everyone. I'm Gina Boss, the Deputy Director here at the Center for Transportation Studies, and welcome to my favorite day of the year at CTS. So we have an action-packed day, starting off with this morning's meeting, and then we followed by our CTS annual awards luncheon that will be taking place at noon. So thank you again for being here, for braving the traffic. So welcome, I guess, to Minnesota and the summer of traffic congestion and work zones, but you all heeded the warning and got here in plenty of time. So good to see you all. Today's meeting is the All Councils meeting, and for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with our council structure at CTS, we have 5 councils, 4 research councils on transportation or environment and energy, the transportation infrastructure, planning and economy, and safety and mobility. And then we have a 5th council that focuses on education and engagement. And while throughout the year, these councils host their own topic-related webinars, today is a chance to bring everyone together on a cross-cutting topic for learning and discussion. So we're pleased that everybody, again, was able to make it. A couple of things that I want to share about the councils is they are really designed to bring together the public, the private, nonprofit, and academia sectors to talk about important issues that maybe need to be researched or where there are ideas that can be implemented. And so we really use this as an opportunity to do that, and also to help CTS in guiding our research, education, and engagement initiatives. If you're interested in joining, we're always looking for members and friends of the council. So if you're not currently a member or a friend and you're interested, please go to the CTS website, and you, as it's mentioned up here, shown up here, and there's a form that you can fill out to start receiving the information about the councils and their meetings. Although we do promote them through our regular events list too, so you can't miss it if you want to participate. Today we are going to be focused on a topic that is part of our theme this year, which is Unpacking Freight, from producers to front door. And I think, started off this year with a bang with our Freight 101 series. So we've been doing a series of webinars that started with MnDOT's an overview of MnDOT's recently completed freight plan, and then we went on to have several sessions on aviation and trucking and rail and waterways. I got it. And then our last one is actually coming up on Thursday, featuring Ari Silke, who's the general manager for freight at Amazon, who's going to be talking about overall sort of their approach to freight delivery, but also looking at the urban aspects of that. So that freight series, I think, has really been very level setting for some of the conversations and discussions that we'll be having throughout the year. And again, today's topic is topics of our speakers is definitely related to that topic, and I'll get to that in a minute. First of all, though, some housekeeping items. So there are all gender restrooms if you go out this door and down to the right. There are also additional restrooms back by the elevators, which is sort of out this door and to the left and to the left. So take breaks as you need, and also obviously feel free to help yourself to the refreshments. So you'll notice as we turn to the agenda, we've got this maybe ominous-looking circle in the middle of the room. We will be talking a little bit about what we're going to be doing with that circle in just a few minutes. But to start off the day, we're going to have 3 sort of thought-provoking presentations on various topics that are tied to freight, including vehicle routing, looking at VMT reduction potential from the freight from the freight industry or the freight sector. And then finally, we'll have a chance to hear from the city of Minneapolis and a smart grant that they're working on related to curb management. A couple of upcoming events that I wanted to mention before we started. So I mentioned the May 8th webinar that's coming up on Thursday, and you definitely have time to register for, still have time to register for that one if you would like. And then our final council seminar of the spring is scheduled for May 23rd, and it's on freight and commercial vehicle safety in roundabouts. So Mark Barrett and Justin Scott from SRF Consulting will be presenting along with Mark Wagner from the MnDOT Office of Traffic Engineering's safety section. So that's, I think, going to be a really interesting topic, and look forward to those presentations. And then, of course, in addition to some of our additional activities on freight, just a reminder that the 2025 CTS Research Conference is scheduled for Thursday, I always have to look, November 6th. And we just completed our call for abstracts, so more information will be coming out later this summer on the program. But as always, it should be an interesting and engaging one, and it will be here in this building again this year. All right. So with that, let's get started. And again, you'll hear more about the conversation circle and how we're going to be utilizing that. Later in the program. So now it is my great pleasure to welcome back a friend and colleague to Minnesota, Kristin White, and she probably doesn't need much of an introduction in this room, but I'm going to read it anyway. So Kristin is the Transportation Industry Executive and Head of Transportation Strategy and Partnerships at Google Public Sector, where she oversees strategy and partnerships. Her philosophy is using tech for good, making government more innovative, elevating women, and leading with heart and authenticity. Kristin was the youngest federal highway administrator ever appointed by the White House, and she previously also served as the Chief Operating Officer of ITS America, and of course, she got her start here in Minnesota at MnDOT, holding several positions, including Director of the CAV office. So with that, please help me in join me in welcoming Kristin.
Well, good morning. I'm going to see if I can get some slides to work. James and Sam, I want to thank you both for your partnership in helping us get together today. I always like to start with a note of gratitude. And Gina, thank you so much for welcoming me. Kyle in absentia. Kyle is actually off on an adorable little bike ride with some very important future leaders, his children. And I am really actually grateful for the many faces I see in the room. I'm trying to look at each and every one of you, because if I took time to call you all out by name, it would take much too long. But my history actually in transportation started, Dillon, at the city of Minneapolis. I was there for a brief 9 months in the Office of Civil Rights before the opportunity at the Minnesota Department of Transportation opened up. And I am really honored, because the only reason I am here today talking with you all is because of you all. And I think one of the themes that I will share at Google is that one of our values is really espousing learning from and with. And that is why I really applaud the Center for Transportation Studies and the University of Minnesota, because you are all unique in that you come together. And I know, for those of you who know me, I can be a bit of a Pollyanna, a little bit overly optimistic. But in this time of turbulence and change, it's really, really important that we convene like this and come together. I'm sorry, James, I might be using the wrong slides. Inevitably and inimitably, the person who's supposed to be talking about technology is probably the worst when it comes to PowerPoint. And for those of us that have never really used the Google suite of systems, which are better than the Microsoft systems, they do take a little getting used to. So I'm going to take just a few minutes today because we do have a little bit of time together, about 20, 30 minutes, and I actually would like to engage in conversation, question, and feedback because Google, if not anyone, if not Minnesotans, know it's not about talking at you and presenting information, it's about engaging in dialogue. So today I really want to focus on this idea that we cannot solve transportation or the world's largest problems with the same tools that created them. Now, we know this quotation from the original Albert Einstein, who is actually someone who needs no introduction, but I think it's really important. I started this work here in Minnesota over 12 years ago, and we're still talking about some of the same problems, if not the exact static problems, even though the environment around us has changed. And so I am a firm believer, as I believe all of you are, that technology, innovation, and especially in this 2025 age of artificial intelligence, these are the types of tools that have to be brought in, as well as the traditional civil and other engineering and planning roles. And only together is that how we're going to achieve the future that we actually do envision in the Minnesota Go 50-year and 20-year vision. But many of us in Minnesota, when we have this conversation, we forget where our roots are. We forget what our mission is. And I remember my colleague and friend, Philip Schaffner, and I, years ago at the Minnesota Department of Transportation, having a conversation about, can you actually espouse the vision as it's stated? Does anyone walk down the hallways of their institution, and can they acknowledge or say out loud the mission or vision statement of their organization? Do you even have a mission or vision statement in your life? And so at Google, we take this very seriously, as we did at the Federal Highway Administration. At the Federal Highway Administration, again, the world's largest surface transportation organization, over $175 billion being deployed over 52 states and territories. Our vision was to enhance the safest multimodal environment to grow safety, equity, sustainability in the world's economy. And everyone who entered the Federal Highway Administration was able to share that mission the first week they started. And so this slide is the Google mission that was founded almost 30 years ago. And the idea is that we should have the right and the privilege to have every piece of information at the tip of our fingers, whether or not you have a smartphone or an analog device. And we don't have that right now. And so we at Google and our 170,000 employees as the fourth largest company are trying to understand how we actually get that information. It's the same questions we had in the Connected Automated Vehicle Office, as we had at Chief Counsel, as we did at ITS America, working with public companies and private companies alike. And what I would love for us together to think about is, what is your organizational mission? What is your life mission? And how do we help get information to people? Well, again, starting with that vision, it's very important for us to understand why Google is in this space. I did not come to Google by accident. It is very intentional, as I've learned from all of my friends in this room and outside this room. It's because what we're trying to do with that vision statement is organize information for all of us, as I know the researchers in this space in freight and other multimodal environments have been trying to do, and not only organize the information, but make sure it's accessible and it's useful. How many times have you been given an Excel spreadsheet and you're like, I don't even know what to do with this document? How many times have you been given a data set and said, this is really important information, and you're turning to your colleague or your friend like, I don't actually know what I'm supposed to glean from this? We are firm believers, as am I, that data is meaningless unless it provides insights. And for us, the work that we do is also meaningless if we're not beholden to our values. And values is something that I have learned very hard and fast in the Minnesota environment and ecosystem, right? We are all about the user. Now, you get to determine who that end user is. For me, it's the people that are traveling in our system, trying to get home to their kids, their partners, their families, and children. Our second value statement is that we are, and I'm sorry for those of you that might be offended by this word, but we are actually blessed. We are very, very privileged to get to work on these problems. And so we have to respect this opportunity, this moment in time to be here together trying to solve enormous problems that keep people up at night. And we also have to do with the dignity and respect of each other. And especially in 2025, where dignity and respect may not be celebrated in all spaces, at Google and in our work together, Friends in Transportation, we have to continue to recenter ourselves and honor that. And so 2 years ago, Alphabet, long before I came into this mix, was thinking, speaking of privilege and our goals and values and vision and mission, What should we be doing more of or less of? And so they realized that with the shareholder benefits of the world's fourth largest company, they have an obligation to reinvest in our economy globally and here in the United States. And so Google Public Sector was founded 2 years ago. And it started with a few what we call verticals, right? And a lot of private companies, you're working in different types of businesses. And so they started in the defense business, asking how technology could help keep us safe and secure in and beyond our borders, nationally and globally. They have now started a vertical on healthcare innovation, where they're using artificial intelligence to, within milliseconds, be able to match a donor in the National Donor Registry. They're also using artificial intelligence to detect cancer earlier, so we're saving lives. And a year and a half ago, they asked a question that we've been asking much longer than Google: what about transportation? And they came to me in April of 2024 with that question, and I almost laughed them out of the virtual call. I said, there's a lot of us that have been thinking about technology and innovation and transportation for a really long time. And by the way, I don't know if you've heard of this thing called the bipartisan infrastructure law, but it's also been around. But never late than ever, right? They realized that they really need to get into this space. And so Google Public Sector, this year we are launching Google for Transportation, which, even though it's not public, I have been honored to get permission to provide an early preview for my friends in Minnesota about what that's going to look like. And it really focuses on these two pillars, right? Innovation and transformation. And as a reminder, Google is very big, and I am still learning this. The acronyms, I thought MnDOT acronyms were amorphous and really, really challenging. The private sector acronyms are nonetheless as to acronyms. And so I am a new Googler, which means I'm a noogler. And this is one of the slides we get when we're trying to learn our ecosystem. So at the center of everything that we build is what's called Google Cloud. And I have a colleague here today, Anne, who I would love to introduce us to, who actually sits in that, because all of our 30 company platforms are built off that system. And the whole idea of it is that it allows us to share information to meet our values and mission statement. It is useful, it is accessible, and it's available in one click. And so all of Google's products and services are based around that. And so you have, many of us know the Google search engine. 1 billion users daily use that. We have, of course, Google Maps and Waze. We have the Moonshot, which is what we call Google X, which is a part of the company that is only dedicated to innovation. It created things like the contact lens, which I'm not wearing today because of Minnesota's lovely pollen. And it also invented things like the self-driving car, which last week the founder of Google X's self-driving program, Chris Urmson, through Aurora, announced they have actually 20 years later launched their product commercially. So this is who we represent, is all of these different companies. And the whole idea is we want to partner with public sector agencies, whether it's federal governments, state agencies, local, county communities, to figure out what is your big problem that we think we can partner to help solve. And so, in a very early preview, I'm going to showcase a little bit of what our Google for Transportation strategy looks like. Mind you, I am only 4 months into Google after a nearly 2-decade career in the public sector, so I'm still learning quite a bit. And so in the conversation circle or in discussion, I would love feedback on how this resonates or maybe doesn't. But one thing we always talk about is safety. And I'm looking at a colleague of mine and good friend, Robert Hampshire, who we also served under the White House and the DOT together. And we would always, together in these meetings, ask questions like, what is your number one priority? And people often respond with, safety. I don't know what any of us are supposed to do with that word. What are the metrics tied to safety? What does Vision Zero mean? And thank goodness when we start a conversation with vision and mission, Vision Zero is our goal. It is to eliminate fully all road fatalities across our system. And Google is helping to do that. So for example, we're working with Caltrans, one of the largest transportation DOTs and state DOTs in the country. And we have an artificial intelligence platform we've debuted with them and have proven that if you are able to work with law enforcement and look at in real time crash reports or near misses, which we're starting to track, you can redeploy and reroute emergency and crash responders and reduce response times by 8 to 11 minutes. Now, 42,000 people died in 2023 on our roads. That's a number we hear too often. But what we don't hear is that 42% of those lives were still alive in the first few minutes. Every minute counts. And so when technology and one of the world's largest technology companies can help partner with us to solve those big problems, we must be doing that. And so our first pillar of this strategy, obviously, obviously, is safety. So we're looking at crash response. We're looking at vulnerable road users because this is a multimodal ecosystem, and crash and pedestrian fatalities are up nationally 17%. That, as someone who is a walker, an avid cyclist, it really strikes me and it angers me, my friends, that we have not solved this problem. And so we are working on that big problem. We are also looking at work zones. I loved when I moved to Minnesota. Everyone was like, well, you know the extra season we have, right? I was like, oh God, you're like 18-month winter? And no, of course, it's construction season, right? It's right in between spring and fall. And work zones, the dynamic nature of work zones, we even talked about it, Gina, this morning. We need better information for our motorists and to keep those workers safe. And who's not to talk about resiliency, right? What a global leader, a national leader in resiliency, or some of us still call sustainability, depending on how you want to frame it. And being the #1 contributor to greenhouse gases, we have an obligation to look at how technology can help us enhance the environment. So what we're doing is we're looking at using NOAA information and global weather information to help do even things like predictive modeling for when flooding or other weather events are going to happen. So for example, one of the last very honorific things I had to do as the former Federal Highway Administrator was to visit the American South in the aftermath of Hurricanes Helene and Milton. 247 people have died, and that number still slowly is increasing. It is because of climate change, which is real, and it is because those two states, Western North Carolina and Tennessee, did not have early warnings to evacuate their folks. And even when they did have the warnings, within 24 hours, they didn't have the technology to share that information with humans. Google just last month debuted with Google Research, a product that allows us to predict flooding 5 days in advance. And friends, that would have saved me many trips and heartbreaking conversations with families who lost loved ones because we haven't solved the world's biggest problems. And as someone, I come from Rapid City, South Dakota. In 1972, my entire town was nearly decimated by a flood. This is personal to many of us. We also have an obligation to community. We know where we come from. We know who we need to support. And so Google understands that it's not just any one mode. It's not just any one vertical like safety or sustainability. We need to look at the whole picture and bring people together. And so we're looking at, and congratulations to my friends who I know at Met Council and Met Transit, expanding transportation access in the Twin Cities Metro. Boy, I remember those community conversations, friends, a couple decades ago. They were contentious. And look at the beautiful work you're doing to expand access. That is exactly what Google is trying to do. Public and multimodal transportation is the pinnacle of how we help solve the world's largest problems and get people to where they need to go. And of course, today's focus is the economy. We know that freight is one of the pillars of how we grow our economy. It's a critical 4% part of our national and growing GDP, which is going to be even more critical as global conversations around tariffs arise. And so we are working very, very astutely with the federal government and with big multi-regional partnerships to understand how does freight move? How can you optimize fleet solutions? And so we have a new product that we debuted last quarter of 2024 with United Parcel Service, where they're using Google technology and AI to reroute in real time their entire fleet across the US, and it saved them already in the first quarter of this year $400 million because they're able to more safely and efficiently get where they need to go and track where their parcels are going, where people want to pick them up, and where they need to be. This is also critical that as we think about the economy, planning is a huge part of that. And so it's looking at how we empower our workforce with these new innovations and solutions, how we share information more broadly. And I want to remind us, I'm going to quickly go through this in a Pechacucha style. These are all values that Google and my part of Google Public Sector, brings to the table. It's about mission, which I started with. It's about human-centered design, which is something that I proselytize about. If we are not placing people at the heart of our problem solving and our problem statements, we are wrong. And I don't like to often say that we're wrong about anything. But HCD, or human-centered design, is a very critical process. And if anyone here doesn't know this 5 steps that are critical to human-centered design, I will be happy to give you a little coaching session after. I also think that we don't measure success enough. And I'm looking at my friends at Minnesota DOT who are national leaders in KPIs and successful performance measurement. We at Minnesota should be sharing this information across our university and DOT systems because we don't have good metrics. We don't know what we're measuring, and if you're not measuring it, it's not getting managed. And I'm talking about things like results-based accountability. Measuring the number of lane center miles is not telling me whether we advanced our Vision Zero mission. When we were in the Connected and Automated Vehicle Office, Thomas Johnson Kaiser, a wonderful leader there, who is probably going to be the next Commissioner of Transportation in some states, sir. You heard me say that. Sorry. He hates when I say that. We talked about results-based accountability, about how do we have a metric that tells us how is anyone better off? Are we doing our jobs? But on the right side, because I don't want to belabor this point, you can just share these values with your own organization. I want to remind us just to continue to have fun together. If you're not laughing, if you're not challenging yourself, if you're not learning, if you're not asking what should I have unlearned today, or if you're not getting feedback from friends on, hey, Kristin, I want to pull you aside. This is what I'd like to see you do differently, then we need to do better. So I want to finish with our Google for Transportation strategies, and then I'd love to engage in conversation. We have a 5-part strategy that I want to impart with all of you, which is first telling our story. Now, today's focus is on the story of freight. And for many of us, we get into these conversations and we want to dive into the research and the research outcomes, or, what did we learn from this particular project, or how are we going to plan this investment strategy? But we forget to ask 2 main questions. One is, what are we trying to do, and why are we here? And I love this second question. Why are you in the transportation field? Because that is the mission. That is your personal and organizational mission. And I have shared with some of you, but maybe not all of you, my mission is very, very mission first. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, Whizzer White, yes, his name was Whizzer. He died in a car crash when my dad was 20 years old. I never knew my grandfather, but I knew of him. It impacted our entire family. The technology that Google and our industry has today in innovation, that the Connected and Automated Vehicle Office has developed, would have saved his life. My dad, and the reason I'm passionate about freight, my dad's best friend, Bob Gallant, was a contributor to the local Rapid City, South Dakota economy. That's where I grew up. And he had Bob Gallant Trucking, and he traveled all over the United States. And at the age of 69, right before he was going to retire, he died in a semi-tractor trailer collision. Some of the data that we're going to be learning today, some of the information that you, my friends, are working on, would have saved his life. This is important, my friends. Our work matters. Tell your story and ask the story of others. What is your why? I also think we need to change the way we talk. Now, Minnesota is actually really good about plain language and making sure we're talking with each other, not past each other. But boy, when I moved to Google, someone used this answer to me when I asked, so what are we doing on this project? I actually screenshotted this message. They said, well, we have several artifacts, and if you look at the back-end code with the original architectural system, it would have made sense that we had a different KPI to understand how we're going to accomplish that outcome statement. And I said, I literally am a former intellectual property lawyer, and I have no clue what you just told me. What plain language is speaking in a 7th grade average reading level. And so in our conversations, please remind your colleagues that we should not be using acronyms. We should not be using big words or things that someone wouldn't understand, because we won't be able to refine the problem together if we can't even understand it. And the third is growing our partner network. Now here, hint, hint, Minnesota partners, Google is growing their partner network, because we know we can't go it alone, and we shouldn't. Google's role is a triumvirate role. And what I mean by that, again, to use plain language, is our first role is just giving the data out. We have a lot of data through maps, through the systems, through the ecosystem I mentioned. But our job isn't necessarily to develop it and help develop the applications and solutions. We need thought leaders like you to do that with us. So we partner with folks like Tony and the Nerdery. Tony, raise your hand, to develop those applications by us, with us, and for you, so it's meaningful. And then the third part of that ecosystem is the user, whether it's you or our customers. I've already talked about human-centered design, so I'm not going to belabor it, but I will ask you, if you want an action item, please go home, Google Stanford D-School's IDEO program, and they will teach you free online the 5-step approach to human-centered design. And if you're asking, well, Kristin, sometimes in your conversations you've talked about the 6-step approach, talk to me after and I'll explain why. There's a reason. Now, the last thing I'm going to finish on is that we are prioritizing the use cases in transportation. And I'm going to start and end with that mission. When I joined Google, I was asked to look at our transportation portfolio across Alphabet and Google Corporate. It took me about 3.5 months, but I realized we had over 400 transportation applications of technology, platform systems, data sharing, and artificial intelligence. Can you imagine, as a local county engineer, thank you, friend, for supporting them, as a city public works leader, how on earth are you supposed to prioritize technology and innovation when there's 400 or more applications to start with. And one thing we tried to do in Minnesota and at the DOT was ruthlessly prioritize. And it was really hard to do that, right? And so we at Google talk about things like, what are your top 3 priorities? And you see I have 4, so apologies. I massaged that a little. And so what I'm encouraging us to do is look at just a few applications that we should be working on together. So this is what Google is going to be working on. First and foremost, safety applications. And you saw a hint of these already. We are going to be looking at crash data analytics platforms, work zone safety applications, applications to detect and avoid vulnerable road users, and to make sure that our workers stay safe during construction seasons and during our projects. 2, we're also going to be looking at resiliency planning platforms. So whether it's planning, long-range planning due to the impacts of climate change with the weather and data information that I mentioned, whether it's ensuring that we have the right information to detect where greenhouse gas emissions are happening, or whether it's like in the LA wildfires, we're working with the city of Los Angeles to do weather and climate monitoring to understand where the community is most impacted and where they need to move until it is safe to live there again. 3rd is operations. 46% of our costs at the Federal Highway Administration were on the operations side, because it's not just about building roads and bridges and systems, it's about maintaining them for their life, which, as we know, is a long life cycle. And so in the operations environment, we're looking at asset management. We're looking at detecting where infrastructure might be damaged. We just last month debuted with Wired and CNN and MTA, the world's largest subway system, at least in the United States, an ability to use a Pixel smartphone, not this Apple phone, don't tell anyone I brought this up, and partner it with an artificial intelligence that can literally predict where the track is having issues, the percent failure, and when it will likely fail. So we're keeping our maintenance workers safe, and we're keeping, obviously, our travelers safe. So many operational environments that we're working on as use cases. And finally, in planning. And I argue that this should always be the beginning and foundation of our conversation, because you cannot build if you don't plan these innovations for them. So long-range planning, we have a new system that we've debuted with the state of California, where all of the information through Google is built into a visual platform that can use what we call BigQuery, which is, again, a non-plain language way to say just the search engine of Google. And within seconds, you can say, okay, in this particular county, where is the highest rate of crashes and where are the most near misses? And then in that, I want you to develop a report for me to understand whether it's HSIP or other state or federal resources where we need to redeploy them and either construct something different or use technology. And within milliseconds, we can create reports for our planners and leaders. Friends, I'm not here to talk about Google. I'm not here to talk about Kristin. I'm here to talk, and I'm going to skip ahead to the why. One of my favorite quotations is from the author Mark Twain. He reminds us that the 2 most important days in our life are the day that we were born and the day we find out why. And at the All Councils meeting and the work that you do at the state, at the local level, and with the Center for Transportation Studies, you are reimagining your why we are doing this work. And so while I know I didn't talk a lot about freight, I am so honored and humbled to be a part of this community and ecosystem, because you helped me identify my why. And what I'm trying to do is help with the power of Google, empower you all to accomplish the missions you're going to talk about today. Thank you for being my friends and colleagues in action. Thank you so much. I tried to make it quick, James, so I don't know if we have much time. Okay.
We can do a couple questions, and I'm Kyle, I'm the director of the Center for Transportation Studies. I snuck in after a Safe Streets pilot this morning at my kid's school. But we have a few maybe like more informational questions or clarification questions with Kristin, and then we're going to do the conversation circle afterwards. So maybe 1 or 2 questions now, if folks have them.
Or stump me or humble me. I mean, come on, friends. We're all friends here. Oh, I said stump, and then Philip raised his hand. Okay, here we go.
Thanks, Kristin. This should be a softball. But so, as you mentioned, and clearly Google's actually been working in transportation for a long time, right? So the Google car, right, now known as Waymo, right? So like there's lots of work. Google Maps, right, has been a you mentioned it, over 200 or 4, I don't know, it was a lot, right? So, I mean, what is different about Google for transportation here? And is it just an intentional focus, or is it a strategy to work with state DOTs, counties? I mean, is it like a Google for government specific innovation, or what's the different now compared to the 200 plus other applications that are already in play?
Yeah. I love, yes. Okay, sure. No, I thank you for that. And thank you for the softball, not the hardball. So it's both a philosophy and an investment focus, right? So again, because Google and I started with mission, they didn't have a mission for transportation, right? We would have conversations with brilliant engineers who designed systems outside of the transportation space. And for example, I had to explain what Vision Zero was to one of them, right? And then with that conversation, we were within 6 weeks able to develop this prototype I mentioned with California, where we are now supporting crash responders to reduce those response times. So it's bringing together industry expertise with the brilliance that, again, even happens in ecosystems like Minnesota, so that we're developing the right things and we have an overarching philosophy. So it's investing those resources in that 5 key strategy, because even a company like Google does not always remember to use human-centered design when developing applications. They might not always remember our mission for Vision Zero, but when we do, and we start with that, then we're able to invest in the mission. So what is again a reminder for all of us, Google wants to partner with us in the public sector. The work that I'm doing is only focused for government agencies. That is the reason I joined Google. I'm sure many of us could have gone to different organizations to do different things, but I love the public sector mission, and as we all do, that's why we're here in this space. So if there are applications or innovations that have never taken place, if there's something that Minnesota or one of our partners has never been able to solve, we want to figure out how to solve that together. I hope that answered the question. Thanks, Philip.
Hi, Kristin. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Mauricio. I work with Hennepin County. My question might not be a softball, because I want to ask about data sovereignty.
Yeah.
This is a trend where we're seeing these companies develop very good and very useful data products that already contain a lot of analytics, and that's great. But the risk is that we might be developing dependencies on some of these products, and that local agencies or state agencies might be losing their ownership of their own data. So I wanted to see if you could comment on that.
Oh, I mean, that could be a whole session, my friend. And it should be a focus for us, honestly, in some of these spaces, if that's an area of opportunity and interest here at Minnesota. So one of the reasons that I personally am at Google, and why Google, I think, is a leader in this space, is we understand that there's been that issue. So again, I kind of mentioned and hinted, I was a former intellectual property lawyer. And I remember when we were at at CavX, we would have companies try and partner with us, and they'd say things like, oh, that's proprietary, you can't have that. And I was like, well, isn't that interesting? I used to practice IP law, so let's have that conversation together. And so to your point, very often, these companies who make significant, if not billion-dollar investments in data and these systems, this is Kristin White's opinion, sometimes hide behind that cloak of this is proprietary to keep that investment with them. But as you've heard me share, Google is different in that they are taking their profits and reinvesting in public sector mission. Now, there's 2 philosophies here, right? One is there is information that is absolutely critical. Can you imagine if we charged people to use 911 services? There's a reason we don't. And so Google is realizing we have an obligation to share certain parts of information to ensure that everyone has the privilege of being safe. It's a right, not a privilege. However, there are opportunities for companies like Google to, what we see is if we can prototype and innovate some of these ideas, maybe companies like Google and others can make a profit off them to cover the costs of investing in those solutions, right? So there's both a portfolio of solutions that we already have that we can sell or partner with, but there's also things we want to ideate and innovate together. And Google's one of the few companies that is very safe and secure. We do not do business with China. I know that's a very divisive topic in these days, but we do that because we want information to remain secure and private. We also are what we call a multi-cloud platform, which means we want to work with everyone. Even if some of those other Silicon Valley names might be competitors, we understand that we need to have a large open source ecosystem so we can share information. Would love to go further on that one, but thank you. Great question.
So I think save more thoughts and kind of broader conversations for the conversation circle. And join me one more time. Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you.
I'm also consistently impressed by the color scheme you got going here. Just all the way through, good branding, not surprising. Oh, great. My phone is also adding to my notes right now because I hit the wrong button. All right, there we go. Hi again, everybody. I'm Kyle Shelton. I'm the director of the Center for Transportation Studies. It's delightful to see you this morning, and I know Gina has already welcomed everybody, and we've had a great first presentation from Kristin. I want to remind you that today's ongoing conversations are also a part of our Unpacking Freight theme, which is happening all year, and you can find more information about that on our website. And we already have, I think, probably pretty close to 8 to 10 presentations going all the way back to last November's research conference that are available for review and watching, and there's much more to come in the months and, just weeks and months. There we go, I almost said years. But yeah, probably years ahead too. And speaking of somebody who's going to probably keep doing great work in this space for the years ahead, it is my pleasure to introduce Alireza Khani, who is an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental and Geoengineering here at the university, and also a CTS scholar and close partner with us on a lot of projects. His focus and some of the things that he's going to talk to us about multiple of his projects today really focus on transit systems and the integration they can have with shared mobility and new vehicle technologies, and he's also applied multiple versions of that to the freight space, which is some of what we're going to talk about today. And obviously his work addresses questions really pertinent to planning and operation of a broad range of transportation services, and so I'm really delighted to have Professor Khani sharing more of his work today.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kyle, Gina, James, Sam, and others at CTS for organizing this event and giving me the opportunity to present some of my work on freight systems. So some of you who know my research is mostly on under the umbrella of sustainability and equity, mostly in the transit domain, but also applying some of those engineering techniques to freight domain. I'm going to talk about some new solutions to the freight systems, but also I'm going to throw in a little bit of transit in there. I'd like to start with this graph that shows that how VMT has been increasing in the country over the last 70-ish years since post-World War II. The US population almost doubled in 70 years, but the total VMT increased 7-fold. And this is mostly because there are more drivers, there are more cars, and people drive a little bit more. On average, the number of miles driven by a car remains almost constant, increasing a little bit, but because there are more cars, there are more economic activities, there are more VMT. So this is something that needs attention, and I see the attention there, of course. But focusing on the trucking, VMT, well, Kristin mentioned that transportation is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. But trucking also, although the VMT is not the bigger part of the transportation VMT, but contributes significantly to the greenhouse gas emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions can be considered one of the major negative externalities to more transportation, more VMT. Some of the strategies for reducing VMT include reducing the number of trips, of course, and that can be by telecommuting, carpooling, better land use, and so on, or promoting public transportation or any other efficient mode of transportation where people can share rides, share vehicles, or other active transportation modes. And a bunch of other strategies that I'm not going to talk about today, but I'm going to focus on the freight sector and some of the strategies for making freight transportation more efficient. Examples include multimodality, using rail and waterways for freight transportation, and using new last-mile solutions, anything from bikes to shared lockers, and so on, to reduce the VMT in the last-mile section of the freight. And also electrification. Electrification of freight may not necessarily reduce VMT, but it could potentially reduce the negative externalities from the freight transportation. So I'm going to focus on these two things, new last-mile solutions and freight electrification. Starting with electrification, actually, and this graph, actually, this slide shows the bottom line of our research on freight electrification. two and a half year project funded by MnDOT and Freight Mobility Research Institute at US DOT Center. A lot of optimization, data analytics, and so on. And the bottom line is that if we electrify medium and heavy duty trucks by adding more charging stations for medium and heavy duty trucks, providing incentives for the initial purchase cost of electric trucks, and so on, in the transition period, we may observe some increase in electric truck VMT. But of course, a decline or decrease in the diesel truck VMT. So of course, the declining curves are for the diesel trucks because they are being replaced by electric trucks. The increasing curves are for electric vehicles because there's going to be more of those electric trucks and more miles driven by them. And these graphs show different scenarios. But the bottom line is that the total truck VMT in the system could increase by something about 4 to 8% within the transition period when we have the mix of both diesel trucks and electric trucks on the road. The reason is that as there are limited charging stations on the network, trucks may make detour to access charging stations or may take different routes that are potentially longer than the shortest routes. Therefore, there's going to be some increase in VMT, the total in the system. But what does it mean really for the system? Let's look at a little bit of a cost analysis. A study by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in 2021 looked at the cost of ownership of electric trucks compared to diesel trucks. And based on 2020 numbers, the cost of electric trucks, batteries, and so on, they concluded that the cost of ownership for electric trucks is 13% lower than diesel trucks. So over the life cycle of electric trucks, the owners, the business, trucking industry could actually benefit from cost saving with electric trucks. And the initial cost of more expensive electric trucks could be paid back within about 3 years. Projecting to 2030, that cost saving could be as much as 30%. So there's a potential for cost saving in the transportation system. And this is not within environmental benefits. And that would be an addition to the cost of ownership saving. What does it mean for the Minnesota network if the trucking sector is electrified? Again, we ran analysis, and we see that this graph shows that by increasing the number of charging stations, the adoption of electric trucks will be increasing. And initially, specifically, there's going to be a sharp increase in the adoption of electric trucks. As more and more charging stations are added to the system and more trucks are electrified, that growth may slow down. But in general, there's a good potential for promoting the adoption of electric trucks in the system by carefully optimizing the locations for charging stations. In terms of cost in the transportation system, considering the cost of ownership of the trucks, the fuel cost, and so on, and also the freight value of time in the system, as we transition to electric trucks in the system, there's a potential for 6% cost reduction. This is the transportation cost reduction in the trucking sector. And there's an additional 8% potential for, there's an additional 8% reduction in environmental impact cost. So although electric trucks may initially increase the VMT in the system, that of course comes with some negative consequences, but in terms of cost and environmental benefits, there's great potential for making transportation more cost-effective and more environmentally sustainable. We talked to, and we developed surveys, and we talked to experts and stakeholders to see what are the main factors in planning for charging station for electric trucks. And from more than a dozen factors that we considered in our surveys, 3 stood out as the most important factors. Number 1, access for electric truck users. What it means is that we should place the charging stations near the freeways and highways where there is higher truck volume, of course. so that with less detour and with higher convenience, they can access charging stations. The second priority should be on proximity to power substations. We should put charging stations close to the parts of the grid network where there is enough power to supply the charging stations without stressing the grid. And the third factor should be on proximity to existing truck stop stations. These are places where truck drivers stop for the rest, for changing shifts and so on, and it totally makes sense to put the charging stations as close as possible to the truck stops to basically coordinate the charging activity, which is a time-consuming process, with the driver resting period. So that was more on the middle mile freight, but looking at the last mile, there are many different last mile delivery methods. Of course, with delivery trucks and vans that are not new, crowdsourced drivers like Amazon Flex is doing that. Collection and delivery points, packages being delivered to places like Walgreens, and people go there, pick up their packages. But getting to a little bit more innovative ideas, shared lockers. Shared lockers, as shown in this picture, are lockers placed at certain locations, and customers are given access to go there, pick up their packages. Shared lockers could be fixed or mobile, for example, on a truck, going to different neighborhoods and giving access to the customers to pick up their packages. Cargo bikes and e-bikes, especially cargo e-bikes, can provide a longer range and reduce the rider's fatigue to provide better opportunity for package delivery in dense urban areas. Drones and sidewalks that I'm not going to talk about in this presentation, but they are great for the last 50 yards, basically getting the package to the doorstep of the customers, and of course transit vehicles that I'm going to talk about. One study that we conducted was on optimizing shared locker locations and delivery. According to UPS, about 2/3 of people, customers, prefer home delivery. They want the convenience of the package being delivered at their home address. They don't want to go to shared locker places and so on. But with a hybrid mode, truck delivery and shared lockers, we thought there could be a potential in reducing the cost and VMT. And again, we developed optimization models with simulation of different scenarios in downtown Minneapolis. Of course, we didn't have the actual package delivery demand, but we used synthetic data. We ran a bunch of analysis, and the results show that as customers are more open to picking up packages from the lockers, the transportation cost could decrease. Actually, by going to the left on this graph, it means that more and more customers are participating in picking up a package from a shared locker. And in total, across different scenarios, we found out that about 19 to 20% of the delivery cost could be reduced. This cost includes the truck mileage, or basically truck operating cost to get the packages delivered, plus any potential driving by customers to drive to the shared locker and picking up packages. So again, this indicates that with the hybrid mode, there's great potential in reducing the VMT and the cost of the package delivery in urban areas. Speaking of transit, which is my top research interest, unfortunately, COVID-19 pandemic caused a significant reduction in transit ridership in all the transit agencies in the country. This graph is from Metro Transit website, but this is not about Metro Transit only. This is about all the agencies in the country who are dealing with reduced ridership or declined ridership. Rail system, BRT, they are recovering ridership gradually, not quite at the pre-pandemic level yet, but getting there. Buses actually having a hard time getting the ridership back. So we thought that the residual capacity in buses at less busy times of the day, at less busy segments of the road, could be used for package delivery in urban areas. And again, the bottom line of the results show that last mile delivery with transit could reduce truck VMT. And this VMT reduction is greater with suburban express bus routes. The reason being that suburban bus routes, in general, they have lower ridership and there's more opportunities for carrying packages. Express buses, they travel a longer distance coming from the suburbs to city center without so many stops in between, so there is a greater mileage saving. So in general, there's potential in reducing truck VMT by using buses for last mile delivery. This actually may also make sense in dense urban areas and combined with shared lockers. Assuming that we can have a few lockers placed at a subset of stations, we call them bifunctional bus stops, where shared lockers can be placed around the transit station. There's greater foot traffic. There's transit riders who go back home. They can pick up their packages and go home, walk to the home. So this hybrid system could actually work quite well, and we can get similar level of package delivery to the passenger transportation. And by doing a lot of simulation studies, we conclude that the empty seat miles of transit could reduce by about 15 to 38% across different routes, different times of the day, and considering all the variations in passenger load. So again, there's potential in reducing VMT by using transit for last mile delivery. But there's a trade-off between serving people and transporting goods. So this may be a very controversial question or topic. And we actually looked at that. We looked at, okay, how much delay are we adding to the transit riders if we transport packages by buses? Of course, as we decrease the spacing between lockers or bifunctional stops, we can transport more packages, but we are adding more delays to the passenger. Running simulation, we found that there is a perfect linear relationship between how many packages we can deliver and how much delay we are adding to the riders. And given the mission of transit agencies, passengers should, of course, be the priority. But by finding a trade-off point between how much packages we want to carry versus how much delay we can accept adding to the passengers, we conclude that in aggregate, each package could add about 2 minutes of delay to each passenger, which is about 50 cents of cost, assuming a $15 value of time of the passengers. So it is really important to do the analysis and find out what is the good trade-off that we can transport both people and packages. But the key point is that any revenue generated by transit agencies should be passed on to the system and spent on improving the system, whether it's by adding more buses, increasing the frequency, or improving the safety and security of the passengers. The revenue should be back to the system. And the last topic is a multi-echelon last mile delivery, which includes both buses and bikes. Sometimes buses may not go to every block of the neighborhood, and people may not want to or may not be able to go to the bus stop to pick up packages. We thought that there could be another business model in which buses transport packages to a certain location, and then at that point, crowdsourced bicyclists can be used to get the packages delivered to the doorstep of people. This, of course, requires very detailed scheduling, optimization, and of course, planning and so on. But doing simulation analysis for 1 day, 100 packages to be delivered, we conclude that truck VMT could be reduced by 70 miles. That is about 0.7 miles of truck miles saving per package. But this entails a significant increase in bike miles traveled, BMT. However, this promotes biking, and bicyclists could be rewarded for doing or contributing to the package delivery system. So in general, I want to conclude that electrifying medium and heavy-duty trucks could increase VMT in the transition period, but it comes with significant benefit in terms of transportation cost saving and environmental impact mitigation. And new last-mile delivery methods, including lockers, transit bikes, they have great potential in reducing VMT, promoting and rewarding biking, and increasing transit utilization and financial sustainability. But again, planning, coordination, and optimization are key. I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors and collaborators, first and foremost, MnDOT, LRRB, and then different cohorts of students, graduate students, who contributed to this research over the years. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James DeSoto, and I am the Director for Program Development and Delivery at the Center for Transportation Studies. And it's my honor to work with the Research Councils and the All Councils meeting this morning. So it is my privilege to introduce our final speaker of the morning, Dillon Freed. Dillon is the Mobility and Curbside Access Manager at the City of Minneapolis Public Works Department. He has worked in public sector transportation management, including municipal and higher education settings, for more than 2 decades. In his current role, Freed leads the city's SMART Grant project that is working to improve curbside management throughout the city. Dillon?
Hello, everyone. Dillon Freed, as James just said. I'm with Minneapolis Public Works. I'm in the Traffic and Parking Services Division. And so I'm here today to talk about our SMART Grant project that we're working on. To talk a little bit about the SMART Grant program initially, the SMART Grant program was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. It's a 2-step program, and so there's for a stage 1 grant, it's about $2 million for planning and prototyping, and then stage 2 grants are for scaling up that program. It's strengthening mobility and revolutionizing transportation. The program is oriented around smart city initiatives, sensors, all kinds of stuff like that. And I feel a little bit like a phony talking about the program up here. We do have Robert Hampshire in the house, the guy with the coolest job title ever, the Chief Science Officer of the now former Chief Science Officer of the US DOT. So his office was the office that created the SMART Grant program and got it off the ground. So just at a high level, I'll talk about our program here and then give a little background. So Minneapolis's SMART Grant project is titled An Open Data Approach to Curbside Management. At a high level, what we're trying to do is just create more efficient, equitable curb access, use data to drive decision-making around curb management, but then sharing information with the different users of curb to sharing that information in an open data approach should improve the efficiency and utilization of the curb. The key elements of our specific project are centered around engagement, data collection, systems integration, and then API creation. I'll get into the API creation a little bit here. My elevator pitch about this project is that it's a digital infrastructure project at its core. So it's building out a digital twin of our curb space, utilizing smart sensor technology to gain information about what's going on within our project corridor, which is about a mile-long stretch of Nicollet Avenue, Eat Street, as it's known around here. But then utilizing a new data specification called the curb data specification and to share that information out through the APIs that we create. Before I get into the project itself, I want to pause and talk a little bit about how we got to the start line of this project. And I want everyone to stop and think back about 15 years ago in 2010. I still had my Samsung flip phone at the time. But this was also a time when yellow cabs were ubiquitous around the country, right? And it was in 2011 that Uber started doing their first rides, and by 2012 they were operating in every state in the country. And it's on that backdrop that venture capital funded tech companies kind of swept across the nation, both Uber and Lyft. What they did oftentimes is they went state to state and passed preemptive legislation. So a lot of the cities were limited in having oftentimes no access to the data that was being generated by the Uber and Lyft, the TNC companies. And I heard Kristin say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So a lot of city transportation professionals were locked completely out of having data to help manage this new service that was sweeping across the nation. So it was on that backdrop that 2018, bird scooters started to show up in every corner of every city around the country, right? They often called it bird droppings in the birds' nests. And at that time, Minneapolis was one of several cities that banded together to help form the Open Mobility Foundation. The Open Mobility Foundation was founded as a steward for what's known as the Mobility Data Specification, the MDS or MDS. MDS was actually developed by the city and county of LA as a way for them to require the shared scooter providers to standardize the information that they would then share with LA to help manage scooters that were operating in the right of way. A lot of other cities said, hey, we want to do that as well. So that's why OMF was formed to be that steward of MDS, and now cities around the country write into their license agreements with those scooter providers that you need to provide us information in the mobility data specification. So fast forward then to 2020, the Open Mobility Foundation undertook a process with a lot of other partner cities, Minneapolis included, to develop a new data specification called the Curb Data Specification. This was partly in response to what was going on with Uber and Lyft, right? So this would be a data spec that, in theory, Uber and Lyft could provide information to the cities through this data specification. This was also, though, of course, as the pandemic was breaking and food pickup zones and e-commerce, which was building and building and then just exploded during the pandemic. Now that everyone has one of these smart devices in their pockets, in theory, there'd be ways for e-commerce and all the different users of the curb to have better access to that digital infrastructure if we could actually build out a digital twin of our curb spaces and make that data available. So the curb data specification, it kind of provides a standardized way to categorize your curb data. There's 3 different APIs. The curb or application programming interface, it's a way to standardize data exchange. The curbs API is kind of the backbone of the whole data specification. It provides, think of just a digital twin, a digital curb map of the curb space that has the regulations associated with it and the geolocation of where everything is located on the curb. The events API is what's going on right now in live time. Is the space occupied? Was there a parking payment made? And then there's the metrics API, which is kind of back-looking. What happened at the curb? What can we do for historical analysis that could, in theory, then be used as a predictor? So this data specification was originated and was in development 2020, 21. And then came along the SMART Grant program. And so the Open Mobility Foundation organized a group of 8 cities, actually 9 of us all together, including Miami-Dade County. And what we did is we exercised the option in the SMART Grant program to apply for a Stage 1 SMART Grant as a collaborative. So each of us, it's not an identical project, but they're all closely related curbside management projects that would utilize the curb data specification in some way. And so it's been great to work with the other cities and collaborate and exchange information and participate in a lot of shared learning. So to get back to the Minneapolis specific project, step 1 that we needed to do really is build out and decide how we were going to create our digital twin and represent our curb space. Back in 2019, a couple of the interns that I supervised at the time built out this really snazzy looking curb map of our city, right? It's very pretty. It's got lots of colors on it. And it was handy in helping to represent what the curbs looked like at the time. However, a lot of this was kind of made ad hoc. So a lot of it was just going on Google Street View, doing estimates of where curb zones were. There was not a maintenance plan to keep it up to date, and it was not built in a way for it to be integrated with other systems. Keep in mind, this is a year before the curb data specification even existed. So This still existed when our SMART grant started, but what we really needed to do then was look to how are we going to create an ongoing, sustainable plan for a digital curb map that would fit into the curb data specification. One of the first things we did with our SMART grant is hire a vendor that would help us with that curb map portion of this and help us with installation of smart sensors. The company's name is Umojo. They did a LiDAR scan of our project areas which is a way to get rapid information and precise data about where the signs were in the project corridors. The LiDAR can actually read the signs. There was some level of grooming the data, like going back through it, making sure it lined up with where the actual curb zones were in our project corridor and things like that. The vendor also then installed their camera sensor technology throughout our corridor. As I mentioned, it's about a mile-long corridor of Nicollet South along Eat Street. As you can see here, how we kind of went from the real life to the digital map, and then they've continued to further refine their platform. It's called the Next City platform. You can see here where after they have the digital curb map of it built out, what we started to do then was build integrations using the curb data specification language through a number of different city systems. And so we had our asset management system that knew where the signs were, and we were able to match that up with where the LiDAR scan said they were. We actually installed some in-ground sensors as well as part of this project to give us that's kind of a binary, occupied, not occupied. And then our vendor also installed the camera-based sensors that were looking down on the curb space that could using AI and analytics, it can tell the type of vehicle, like the size of the vehicle, how long it's been dwelling there. If there's double parking instances, a lot of information is being generated from those video sensors as well. The company's been working with us to further refine their systems. So once we have this digital twin built out, we went looking for other data sets. And so we're pulling in data, like we have a very good data set about our streetlight information, for instance, which happens to be where we mount our cameras for this. So it's very handy to pull that in. We have data about our EV charging stations. One of our mobility hubs is at the corner of 26th and Nicollet. So we're pulling in asset information about our EV charging stations. And just a lot of other information. So it's an ongoing process of further building out this like digital twin representation of our curb space and then having it all in the curb data specification as well. As we're getting information from the smart sensors in this corridor, it's giving us a good picture about what's actually going on in our curb space. And so like the longest parked vehicle here is 21 days, so that is maybe a candidate for an abandoned vehicle. But there's a lot of like shorter dwell times. If we could zoom in a little bit more on this, you'd see things like, the type of vehicle that's parked, their average dwell times, the times a day that are the most busy, things like that. So we're getting a lot of like rich data about what's going on in the corridor. The vendor also has helped us create, and we're hosting an API, of the curbs API of the curb data specification on our city's open data portal. So we're nearly ready to make that publicly available. We're working, for instance, with the University of Washington Urban Freight Lab. They're going to be one of the first organizations to actually ingest that data through the API that we create. So we had been hoping that there would be more interest from the private sector in ingesting those APIs, but what we're finding through a lot of our stakeholder engagement is that we're not quite there with them. I'll get into that in just a little bit here. But one thing we are doing with the data that we're getting now is looking at ways that we can reallocate curb space to where we have conflict points, where there's a lot of double parking and things like that. So we are finding ways to get some before data and then after data after we make curb allocation changes. So hopefully improving curb management throughout our project corridor. Stakeholder engagement has been a huge part of this project as well. We really want to match up, what we're seeing on the ground with like what's actually happening in real life. So we have a pretty developed stakeholder engagement plan. We're engaging with both businesses and community stakeholders throughout the corridor, which is, partly knocking on doors. Some of it is sharing surveys with some of the businesses and communities. We've done a lot of work to both reach the delivery and service drivers themselves, but also the companies that are that these drivers work for. So it's really difficult, we've found, to reach a lot of the gig workers. But it's been tough. Some of our engagement team sits outside of the restaurants and is like, hey, can you take a survey? And they're like, nope, I got to pick up my order. But we're finding ways like here, giving them a slip with a gift card or whatever and say, fill this out when you do have free time. So we are getting some information from some of the drivers. FedEx was nice enough. We've convened a local group of some freight providers like FedEx, a local place, Speedy Delivery, and then a few other local providers that have kind of been nice to meet with us through a series of meetings and talk about the actual, would you be willing to ingest an API? And we're getting there with them. There's been some traction there, but a lot of work goes into kind of creating the sense of like if we have this digital tool available, how can you actually use it? So I'll just kind of briefly go through some of the findings of our stakeholder engagement. This is one of the business, reflecting some of the surveys from the businesses in the corridor. And so just kind of breaking down where they're getting their deliveries. Is it on the street? Do they double park on the street? Is the delivery in the alley? To just really understand how the freight network is working in this commercial corridor. And then things like what types of vehicles are making your deliveries, semi-truck, box truck, cargo van, things like that. I get a kick out of this next one. This is some of the survey results from the drivers themselves. And so, rank your challenges, limited parking, can't find a place to park. And then the second graph is great. Have you ever gotten a ticket double parking? It's 0% of the respondents have ever got a ticket for double parking. So getting a lot of good, rich results from our stakeholder engagement. Some of the key takeaways from our stakeholder engagement are that there's different needs amongst the different types of services, right? You can see a semi right here backing into a parking lot on Nicollet. I mean, if you've ever been on Nicollet, it's not that big of a street, and yet we have semis like doing multi-point turns to get in to make deliveries. But think about the needs of that versus a gig driver in a sedan just doing a food pickup from Quang's or something like that. So wildly different needs amongst the different providers. It's not shocking, but when you're able to actually quantify that through some of the data that we have out there, it's enlightening. The drivers, as we've been working with them, like FedEx let us do a ride-along, for instance, the drivers want to park somewhere safe and legal, but if that's not available, they're just going to park illegally because they can get away with it. It's so rare that people actually get double parking citations, and that's why we're really working to try to reallocate curb space as one of the main objectives of this project where it's needed and find ways to operate that. There is delivery provider openness to working with us on digital tools that would make routing or delivery space availability information more available to them, but I think until we have a reliable product to offer them, there's not really what comes first with the chicken or the egg there. So we're trying to work to break that cycle a little bit. And then, curb allocation, as I mentioned, is one of the main things we're working through for this phase 1 project. I will say Minneapolis partnered with the city of Seattle when the notice of funding opportunity came out for the first batch of Stage 2 SMART grants last year, and we were selected as one of only 8 projects in the country to be awarded Stage 2 funds. And so with the change in administration, we're still working through some of the grant agreement process, but we're hoping to have that wrapped up soon. Our Stage 2 project would essentially scale up the same treatment to many different corridors where we'll be adding a lot more smart sensor technology around the city, but it will really help us advance a lot of the building out of our digital infrastructure, having a really solid ongoing plan for the maintenance of our digital twin that we create and advancing work with making that information available through APIs to be a more reliable project. So, and that's what I have.
If you've been with us before, you know how we do this. What we'd like to do is, if you have a question for one of our presenters, we ask that you come into the conversation circle. You'll be given a microphone, and you can ask your question. As Nicole is modeling, thank you very much. That's fantastic. And what we'll do is we'll take turns. After you've asked your question and it's been answered, we ask probably that you vacate the circle so others can come in and participate, other than our four that are stuck there, our presenters. So again, hopefully you saved all those fantastic questions. Kyle will help moderate as we go forward if needed, but I'm confident that people will be able to handle this on their own. So thank you very much.
All right, Nicole Morris. I'm in the Department of Mechanical Engineering and a big human-centered design fan. My question is about Google's position in their ability to support intelligent speed and speed limiters, particularly thinking about freight. So some of our fatal crashes tend to over-involve commercial motor vehicles. And if anybody uses Google navigation, you can see that Google has it at their fingertips exactly how fast we are going and how fast we should be going. So this is the hardball question. What is Google's role, and how do they envision themselves playing as a big safety contributor to preventing crashes before they happen through slowing speeds?
Great question, Nicole. And again, starting with a note of gratitude, Minnesota is very lucky to have Nicole in the Human First Lab, literally like first in class, not just in the States, but globally. Side note, people often stop me like, do you know Nicole? And I'm like, I actually get to say yes, that I do. So kudos for the continued research. And hopefully we'll be investing in that work. So I'm going to kind of hedge a little bit, Nicole, with that answer and say I think often we think there's a technology problem when really it's a people and process or policy problem. We have technology that can reduce speeds or limit them. In fact, the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, just 2 weeks ago announced they are deploying that as a statewide solution. Google might have information, and often Google, sometimes, if people think we get information that could be published on our roads, but our response is, actually, we might have the technology to share that information, but you haven't made the policy decision that's so important on that topic. So with the example of speed limiters, it is really up to the community, to the state, however, the jurisdictional lines draw or fall to make those policies statewide. And then a company like Google, absolutely, to your point, has a responsibility to share that information as I shared in our mission. But too often, and I've been unfortunately removed from the Minnesota conversation for too long, but I'm hoping those conversations are happening so that the university's leadership and the state is saying this, like the Commonwealth of Virginia, is where we want to go. And then absolutely, we would be sharing information that makes that widely known and accessible to the public. But I often say this line that we often get inquiries from Google Maps and the Waze teams, why aren't you showing this on your map? And we have to respond by saying, show me the document that your city council or your state legislator has said this is what you want us to do. Have you actually made that decision? Because we cannot share information that you as leaders have not come to. And we can go into a lot of detail there, but that's a great question.
So, Nicole, you teed this up perfectly. I was going to ask, and you already started to talk about this, Kristin, sort of all three of you together thinking about going from the data to the research to the application. I think this is an example of another place where you could do that. The curb space itself, like that was a nice little build on all three of you too. I'm just kind of curious from all three of you all, like thinking about this, you've already answered a bit of the process question from your perspective. You have the data we're looking for, the policy we're looking for the city. How does that chain need to happen, and how does it self-reinforce? So like going from the data to the research to your application, like what are some of the lessons you all have learned about that? And how do we do that better, whether it's intelligent speed assist or curb space or package delivery? Any thoughts on that? And others can come up live. Like, you don't have to wait until the end of the question. If you come up, it's a signal that you have something to go. And
Yes, moving to application. I'm still formulating. What is interesting from moving to application on that?
Again, gratitude, Dillon, Smart Grants. Where's our Smart Grants? Like Robert and I, when we saw some Minnesota representation, we were like, oh yeah, leading the way. So kudos, congrats. I think curb space is actually huge. If we want to continue to dive in on the more local aspects. So your real question was, what does this partnership looks like? So for example, the Open Mobility Foundation, which Minneapolis, key leader in, helped develop the curb space standard so that we have standards. Kind of to your question, like what are the standards? Like intelligent speed limiting, we don't really have a national standard on how to apply that quite yet, even though I think we have some ideas. We now have a standard, right, for managing curb space. So now it's our job to, as a private company, make sure everyone knows, right, that we helped found this standard. We are working with cities like Minneapolis, but I also think companies like Google are still learning in that application. So I would love to see whether it's universities convening spaces like this so we can learn what we should be doing better in that space.
Yeah, and that was really part of why we founded the Smart Curb Collaborative, because if each city goes to Amazon or Google or you name it, company, UPS, FedEx, if we go to them individually as a unique city and say, we want you to share data with us, or we want you to hook into our data feed, they're just like, why? You know, why would I do something in Minneapolis that I'm not going to do in Dallas or Miami or whatever? So that was one of the main reasons why we formed the Smart Curb Collaborative, was to try to create that critical mass of a group of cities that are all going to say, hey, we're going to make this curb data available to you in a standardized format. Are you willing to ingest it and utilize that data? And we really see a role for cities in that, right? Because, you know, a state DOT or a county or different sizes of government don't really have that on the ground, like boots on the ground, like need, right? That's outside of the scope of a state DOT necessarily. But it's still tough. We have tried to make some inroads, but you know, getting in the development cycle of an Amazon, for instance, is just, they're still kind of going, why would we do that? And so a little bit of what we're pivoting on is trying to work like with an INRIX of the world, for instance, to have, or Populous or whoever, to ingest our data and then make it available as a product to someone else. Like we as a city are going to make that data available as an open data thing, because that's just what we're doing. But you know, a small size company like a Speedy Delivery who's still doing their routing on paper, for instance, you know, they're not going to have the programmers available to do the high level stuff of ingesting an API, right? And so there's a lot of different like use cases or different scales of operators that would need to make use of that data in different ways. The other part, though, that's still the nut we're trying to crack is, like, how do we maintain this data on an ongoing basis? The city of San Francisco, who's also a part of the Smart Curb Collaborative, their project is digitizing their curb space in the whole city. And, you know, it's one thing to take a snapshot of your curb space today. It's out of date tomorrow. I mean, in Minneapolis, we have 6 different sign crews that are out changing signs throughout the city on any given day. Depending on the project. So you can imagine a city like LA or something like that has probably dozens of those. So coming up with that plan for ongoing maintenance so that the data is reliable and usable. That's what we hear from the likes of INRIX, who kind of has been doing this work in a lot of cities around the country. They have a team of people who go out in the cities where they have developed curb space and continue to make sure their data is up to date and relevant. That's a huge resource commitment. That's one thing I'm trying to communicate to my bosses, right? If we're actually going to do this, like, it's going to take a huge ongoing resource commitment to maintain that data and have that expertise within our organization.
Okay. I'm not sure how much I can add to the conversation, except that I say, you know, data for us researchers is invaluable. We are always looking for data. The solutions are unlimited with the brain power of all the researchers at the university. And I want to mention the city of Minneapolis as one of the great examples of sharing the data. You will be positively surprised if I tell you how many of students in my classes use your data portal, or maybe I butchered the term. This is open data portal. And these are not graduate students who work on sponsored projects. These are undergraduate students who are looking for data problems to practice, you know, their technical skills. Thank you very much for sharing the data. But also,
We're hiring interns for Smart Stage 2, so I'll hit you up.
yeah, we have wonderful students, at the University of Minnesota. I'm happy to help. But also from the bigger companies, Amazon, Google, etc., Apple, there's huge amounts of data, and there's value in that. And I want to put government agencies and policymakers on the spot of if there's anything can be done to build relationship and make the data more openly available and protected, but also more openly available to the researchers, there's going to be benefit for both the government and for the people.
Elliot McFadden with Minnesota DOT. I supervise our mobility management unit in the Office of Transit and Active Transportation. Wanted to chat a little bit about, or ask about, thoughts on the future of what you're doing with the curb space and how that fits into the larger ecosystem. I mean, short of congestion pricing, it seems that the overwhelming majority of research shows cost of parking is probably your number one lever to change VMT. And to change commuting patterns and travel patterns. So it seems really important that we have this technology that would allow things like dynamic pricing and things like that. Sort of two-part question, I guess. One is, as you're thinking about kind of operationalizing this, you mentioned encouraging the delivery vehicles to use this other system. If you're not actually ticketing them and giving them the stick as well as the carrot, how do you envision that happening? And then in the larger system, part of my portfolio is running MnDOT's Mobility as a Service platform, which currently focuses on shared mobility and public transit in trip planning, booking, and payment. But we're really thinking about how that fits into automotive technologies and more digitalization of cars, and how we could be sharing the entire landscape with folks through those systems, so we could create incentives, we could create more dynamic pricing kind of options to encourage people to make changes, and it feels like parking is also a missing link. So do you have any also thoughts on, and maybe this brings in Google a little bit, how you combine we have trip planning over here and kind of some of the connected vehicle technology. We have transit, shared mobility kind of over here, and we have parking over here, and we don't seem to be talking to each other.
Yeah, I'll start first with the whole encouraging people to use loading zones without enforcement. Unfortunately, the SMART grant program, we cannot be using those funds for automated enforcement, so we've had to not incorporate that as part of this project. There are cities around the country that are using automated enforcement, like video-based enforcement, LPR, things like that, as part of their loading zone management strategy. I will say the state of Minnesota has really unfriendly legislation for automated enforcement. It is really difficult for when you have an agent who has to go out and drop a ticket on someone's car or vehicle, right? If it's a binary thing, are they in compliance? Are they not in compliance? It's much easier. So if it's a parking meter, have they paid the meter? Yes or no. If it's a commercial vehicle loading zone, is it a commercial vehicle? Yes or no. But a lot of our loading zones throughout our city and cities throughout the country, it's a time-based thing. They can be there for 30 minutes. And if you now need an agent to chalk a tire, write a license plate down, whatever they do, come back in 30 minutes and then say, are you in compliance, yes or no? It's just a really inefficient method of enforcement. So using some of these smart sensor technologies to be part of the enforcement network, I think is key to actually being able to use pricing as part of the incentive structure for managing loading zones. And hopefully that's what we're working towards, but there's no way we're going to have a smart camera on every corner of the city, right? So some of it is utilizing technology in the highest demand corridors to achieve specific outcomes, but a lot of it is using the information that we are gathering to make better policy decisions on how we manage our curb space. That's a lot of what we're trying to use, a lot of the learnings from our SMART grant to actually develop a formal curb use policy for the city, which will involve a curb area planning program as part of it as well. So So that's a huge part of it. And as far as getting the different stakeholder groups talking and coordinating on mobility as a service, I feel like we're trying to break down some of those barriers. That's, I think, why my the position I'm in was previously separate. It was a mobility, and then I was on the curbside management, and it has just been created now that we're aggregating a lot of this together. And I often tell people that I straddle both sides of the fence of the travel demand management fence, right? I do the incentivizing what we want and disincentivizing what we don't, and I do think it'll take a lot more enlightened leadership. It's one thing if some of our on a staff level recognize that, but communicating that up to policymakers to really prioritize, like synthesizing those things, is, I think, a challenge and opportunity.
I agree with you, Dillon. I have two examples to answer your question, Elliot, and thanks for being in the circle. And I think ultimately it does come down to a communications breakdown and barriers. So I'll take the analogy of like congestion pricing as far as some of our policy issues. Take New York, right? First of the year, first city in the country, arguably, to really have a wide scale issue. And the Google research that we published about a month ago shows it did everything we thought it would do. It is allowing people to move more efficiently but still safely under the speed limits. It is not actually deploying a lot of congestion into the arterial side streets. People are using more transit, and freight is moving more efficiently. So despite the freight sector really challenging these types of policies, it's actually helping them move more efficiently and deliver more goods and better routes. But the communications has never been great. Congestion pricing, who came up with that phrasing? We need more, folks in, maybe Kyle, we can work with the communications folks, in the universities, because Liberation pricing, freedom for all. We are, in Transportation Friends, we are terrible at marketing and communications, despite having brilliant minds, especially here in Minnesota. We have brilliant communicators, and we are terrible. And what we need to do, and Elliot's actually done a good job with his program, is start with what you're trying to communicate first, and really understand how our users, whether it's a policymaker or the community, is going to resonate with that. And you asked a question about the in-vehicle design and getting some more of these products and services into that. It's because we aren't actually sharing that message on what we're doing with these big automaker makers. So for example, and Kyle and other folks are on these national boards and institutions, whether it's ITS America or TRB, where these large institutions are where these different public-private sector companies are supposed to be sharing information. But the Automotive Alliance has said very publicly, remember, Robert, when we were talking about connected vehicles, we need 5 to 7 years in advance notice to redesign just to integrate connected vehicles. We want to know that, but we need to know that nationally this is going to be a trend. We can't know that just Minnesota is going to do this, or just Minneapolis within the state of Minnesota. And so they aren't tracking the local narratives, the local newspaper, the local press releases, but maybe that's a role of an institution like CTS. We need to do a better job. And the last thing I'll say on this is, right as I was leaving the Department of Transportation, we were talking about the role of institution. And what a conversation now in 2025, because institutions have an obligation to bring people in and help break down those silos, or as one of my federal highway colleagues called them, cylinders of excellence. We actually, I think, need to rethink what a national institution looks like. I think it is our job, and I look to the CAVEX office like Thomas, part of his role is to go out to these national conferences, represent the state, but then bring what he's learning back into the organization and make sure everyone learns from what he was able to do. I think we need to do a lot more of that.
All right, I'm Mark Barrett with SRF, an old freight planner. So I'm going to steer this back and present, I guess, a bit of a challenge and then let people react. But in Minnesota, we like to think we're exceptional. But coming out of the pandemic, the Minnesota economy has been lagging the nation pretty severely, especially in exports. Last year, according to Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, we ranked 42nd in exports as a state. We're a very high technology economy, especially in the Twin Cities. There's been a lot of studies at the Humphrey Institute. And so air cargo has always been one of those issues that has been a challenge. MSP is land constrained. We actually truck an awful lot of our air cargo shipments to O'Hare. And so there's been a number of studies that have suggested if we could be more efficient while still being landlocked at MSP. And I think there's a couple things I'd like to throw out. I think the whole curb management, this idea of a digital twin, I had the pleasure of meeting retired General Stephen Lyons, who is the chair of the White House Supply Chain Task Force, a few years ago, and he said, what we need in the United States is digital twins around some of our key supply chains. So the idea of taking, this curb management and sort of expanding it to something like an air cargo platform. Many European and Asian countries are doing it. They're called community cargo systems, not the best phrasing probably to present to the private sector in the United States. Another issue, I thought it was interesting that you were looking at how transit gets impacted by including package delivery. Back when I was at MnDOT, we were about to open the first light rail transit at the time when Medtronic decided to move their distribution out of the state because so many times their trucks were delayed getting to MSP when we had a snowstorm. I encouraged the commissioner at that time to look at their cylinder of excellence in transit and say, could we put an air cargo chassis on a light rail or an air cargo container on a light rail transit chassis? It'd be interesting, I think, to try and simulate that and see how that would impact. Because if we could load air cargo containers off the airport and then load them, already loaded at the airport, I think it would. So anyway, I think there's a lot of ideas we've talked about today that, for those who are not aware, there's a gentleman named Bill Goins, former FedEx, who started an International Commerce Mobility Forum to have a discussion around what can we do to sort of change this trajectory. I mean, one of the reasons Minnesota is facing a huge deficit isn't just because we're spending too much, it's because our economy is not growing as we anticipated. So we need to, how can we try and adjust that challenge through some of the technologies and data we've talked to today?
As he hands the mic to his left, I love it, Mark. Thank you for your leadership. I want to reintroduce Miss Ann. She is here representing Google. She's actually here in Minnesota, based in Minnesota, to help a lot of these conversations. And Mark and I actually already had a side chat on this, friends. So we're actually going to be following up on this. I don't know if I have a lot to share right now, but I do think we have an obligation with freight being a real economic driver to tackle this for Minnesota. And I think we could cross-apply that to a lot of different markets. So much more to come, Mark. I know that's not an answer, but we have much to work on together.
Go for it. I have a question.
Yeah, if you have something to add, Mark, go for it.
Okay. Just very quickly, great idea, using rail or light rail for transit. And after my presentation, a few people actually came and asked me, do we have freight on transit in the US? And although I don't know the answer, there may be some pilot tests going on somewhere in the country, but it's actually something that happens in Europe. And there are videos that show that light rail with a rack in front of it, with packages on it. So it's definitely a viable option. I think that's a great idea to connecting the hub, the locations to the airport. I just want to say that this is a great idea. Happy to explore it more. Thank you.
One thing I'd have to add to that, I lived in Switzerland for 3 years. I hate to be the person, well, I used to live in Switzerland, but really it was the more rural transportation, the buses, they had kind of Southwest style, commuter style buses in those areas that would go like up the Alps. It was really impressive, but they also had all of their mail being delivered by those buses. And then they also, because it was a country-owned, a state-owned rail system, which unfortunately we do not have in the U.S. I'd say the biggest mistake that our transportation system made way back when. They were able to manage cargo and passenger rail in the same system. So you would see big cargo containers go through major rail, stations. And then you'd see like military vehicles also being transported. So everything was connected and it worked really well. So if there's a way we can make that happen in the U.S., given our privatized rail network, that'd be great. If you can get BNSF to like be cool with a cargo container on their line with transit, I think that would work great. Anyways, I digress. So the question I had, Callie, you're gonna love this because last year's theme was rural communities, right? So I have a question that's kind of gonna bridge the two of these. I was at a Complete Streets training last week that MnDOT is running, and if you haven't heard of these trainings and our policy, I'd really encourage you to take a look at it. Nissa Tupper in my office is doing a really great job leading that work at MnDOT. But one of the main reasons that I was in Columbia Heights, one of the main reasons that they were not interested in kind of shifting modes and adjusting kind of who is taking up space on that roadway is because of freight deliveries for businesses. So Central Avenue, going through Columbia Heights Main Street kind of feels more like a highway because there's 2 lanes. People are supposed to be going 30, but they're usually going like 45 because of how it's designed. And they didn't, the coffee shop didn't want their delivery person to have to walk a few blocks, things like that. So they were not interested in adding a bike lane, adding transit, more space for them. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that we have a lot of communities in Minnesota that feel similarly, that have these main streets that are now taken up by mostly MnDOT roadways that were not designed necessarily for people in other modes. And we have supply chain networks that are all over rural Minnesota that are impacting urban freight delivery, right? So I'm curious, what do you think are some opportunities and challenges for not just thinking about urban freight and curb space, but also rural communities that could really benefit quite a bit from planning for all users? And it could be great kind of pilot case studies, because the challenges maybe are not the same big challenges that Minneapolis has. There's less players, maybe less different kinds of politics, I guess I'll say. So I'm just curious if you can react to that and what sort of challenges and opportunities planners and other colleagues here can be thinking about when we're working more in rural Minnesota.
I was actually going to ask Alireza and the folks what research we could use, because I really resonate with that, Shannon, and by the way, nice to see you. So I come from rural America. I come from rural South Dakota, and so we very much resonate with these themes. And I actually think it's a yes and, not an either or, but we don't frame it like that, right? Often in the rural conversations, economic conversations, especially the heightened political conversations now, it's as 2 opposing views. But I think we would love to see data that says, first of all, there are options. There are ways to develop and invest in the curb and a protected bike lane that also allows some short-term parking, right? It's not like we haven't figured that out before in areas. But I would love to see the data, right, that talks about actually, are you losing business? If so, by how much? How much would a bike lane cost versus the number of safety issues? And we talked about this. I think I was joking with Jean at the beginning. In 2018, we had the very first CTS hosted conversation on autonomy and autonomous vehicles. And one of the biggest takeaways from that conversation was, what is the cost of the transportation system? And I know a lot of your colleagues are working on this, a lot of the CTS researchers, there's a lot of thought leadership out of the University of Minnesota, but I think that's where we should be focusing the conversation, because rural America especially is always about cost. How do I get somewhere efficiently? It's taking me a couple hours to get where I need to go because it's just further away. If we could translate that, and it goes back to your communications, right, Dillon, conversation about how do we communicate that? So maybe it's a question back for you, Alireza and team, about the communications and transportation costs.
No, I just want to admit that, yes, there's opportunity and there should be more work in rural areas. Maybe it's more about, different entities, communicating better, because we have projects on rural transit, and there are transit gaps. The interesting thing that data shows is that after the COVID pandemic, rural transit was not impacted as much as urban transit. And actually, the ridership recovery was quite good, almost to the pre-COVID pandemic. But there is a still transit gap. There are, places that are not connected, or the service is not frequent or not available during evening times, weekend, etc. And more e-bikes are becoming popular with the e-bike rebate program and whatnot. I think it's more a matter of integrating all of these systems and making these talk to each other, work together, and making delivery as part of the same transportation system. That's what I think. I don't know if this is an answer to your question. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. And Joe, you're our last question or comment, and we'll give you guys a chance to respond, and then we'll wrap up.
All right. Joe Gustafson, traffic engineer for Washington County, and this year's chair of the Safety Mobility Council for CTS. I would most like to talk to you about roundabout mapping, but that's kind of an esoteric concern, so we'll catch up later about that. My concern is a local agency question. I know I've got some other local agency colleagues in the room, but there's long been kind of a barrier or kind of a black box between local agencies that know our system very well, what's open, what's closed, what's recently been permanently changed, and conveying that information to mapping services where Google is obviously a dominant player. I know City of Minneapolis had this when they hosted the Super Bowl a few years ago, and intermittent road closures based on different events and stages of that weekend. With this new Google for Government initiative, is there any glimmer of hope you can offer, or any suggestions for how to navigate the interim where we can communicate this type of information and get this out to the public that really needs it, so to help reduce VMT and just keep the public generally informed?
1,000%, Joe. First of all, thanks for sharing that work, because that's really important work. And the county perspective, I think, is even more critical sometimes. And we don't always talk about the county perspective. We sometimes talk about like an urban city perspective. So very much appreciate that. And we'll have to offline on some of these things. And Joe, we'll connect and talk about, that. But I will share very candidly, when Google approached me with this idea of Google for Transportation and we need to expand Google public sector, this was last year, my first question back to them was like, you can't even take the data that we have that we know and publish that on your maps. Why would I come join you? And Anne has been through this. I know she's had many of these questions. One of the things that we recognized is twofold. One is Google is evolving just like any company or any organization. And there was a long time, even when we were at Minnesota DOT, and still sometimes we would say, we are giving this information. We have an open platform. We have a GitHub. Why aren't you pulling it? And it's been a twofold response. One is, for a long time, we didn't have the resources at Google. The Geo team that does maps and Waze is actually a very, very small team. Despite people knowing that there's 170,000 people at Google, that team is very lean. And so what we've been doing is investing in that to make sure that we have people that can either, if you don't have the data, make sure that we're working with Google Public Sector to do that together, which we do now often. And two is a change in perspective. So in the last 2 years since Google Public Sector, we've been really building this dynamic partnerships with what we call our GEO, which oversees all maps, satellite, Earth, to really make sure that, like we were talking about, we were silos even within Google, right, Anne? And so it's breaking down those silos with kind of the mission that we've inspired. Now, will there still be challenges? Yes. Often when people come to me, like, I tried to do what you said, Kristin, and upload my data, we still have data challenges. Sometimes public agencies think they're giving us the data that we need to publish, and it's really not publishable. Or there isn't a confirmation that this is actually, going back to the policy issue, what your whole region has decided you need to publish. You might have one entity in that region, but this has to be a collaborative, right? The county can't conflict with what the state thinks the data is, and we are not gonna get in that debate, folks. But that's where you as leaders can come in. So it's both an answer, Joe, which I really appreciate the question about. We're learning a lot, we're striving to do it better, but there's still a lot that we're doing, and we're excited to talk more about. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just jump in briefly too. There needs to be a lingua franca, right? A common way to communicate. And that's one of the things that, for instance, the city of Seattle, our partner on Smart Stage 2, on an unrelated project, they are starting to utilize the mobility data specification from the OMF to communicate emergency information in Seattle. It's the first time in the country that a city has created a mobility data feed, right? Because mostly we get mobility data from scooter providers and use that for what we need. But the city of Seattle is creating a feed for emergency services, Google or whoever, to hook into. And so when there is some sort of critical incident, there's a way to communicate that information out to the public generally. So that's what some of these data specifications have, that potential. I've seen a lot of stuff about autonomous vehicles and how they interfere with emergency zones, right? And so this is becoming more and more of a thing as, Waymo's trying to expand to more jurisdictions and whatnot. Being able to provide like consistent, reliable digital information as the jurisdiction out is a different dynamic than us ingesting it from the providers. And so programs like the Smart Grant program, we're really trying to utilize this to build our own internal capacity to have that reliable information and to be able to maintain it. So,
great, thanks, Dillon. Thanks all. So please join me in thanking the panelists one more time and these great questions.